Hello students, welcome to Edubbey Global Solutions. Today we'll be looking at sexual reproduction in plants. The flowers of plants are the organs of sexual reproduction in plants. Flowers have the following parts: the sepals. They are usually green leaf-like structures which protects the flower when it is in the bud. The petals. They may be large, colorful, scented, with lines on them if the flower is pollinated by insects. The anthers, they are situated at the end of the filament, and the anther plus filament gives the stamen. They contain pollen sacs, which make and then release pollen grains, each of which contains the male gametes. The carpels. The carpels are the female part of the flower. Each carpel is made up of a sticky stigma connected by a style to the ovary, in which lie the ovules. Stigma, style, ovary, and ovules, which contain the female gamete. A quick question: anther is the part of the flower that produces the pollen. Here we find out that anthers are situated at the end of the filament and they contain pollen sacs. So let's go with yes, anthers are the part of the flowers that contain the pollen. This slide is showing us a well-labeled insect pollinated flower, showing us the ovary. I don't know why the is not clearer than these, but we can see the ovary here is located here, and inside the ovary we have the ovules. Here is the star, and at the top here we have the stigma. And looking here, we have the filament, which is like the stick holding up the anther, and together they form the stamen. Here we have the petal or corolla, and then we have the sepal or calyx. The stigma, style, ovary, oval together form the carpel or pistil, the female part of the flower. On this slide, we have a wind pollinated flower showing us filament, a loose and long filament, an anther that is loaded with pollen, and it dangles loosely from the filament, thus exposing the pollen. And we also have stigma, Fredry stigmas that are adapted to catch the pollen. So we also have wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers are small and inconspicuous. They have small and inconspicuous petals. The anthers and stigmas hang outside the flower. The stigma is the part of the pollen that receives the is the part of the flower that receives the pollen. True or false? True. This slide is showing us the differences between the petals of insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers. Wind pollinated flowers have petals, small petals, or they don't have petals at all, while the insect pollinated flowers have large and conspicuous petals, which act as landing for insects. The petals are also colorful, while in wind pollinated flowers, their petals are drab. In wind pollinated flowers, their petals have no scent, while in insect pollinated flowers, they have scented petals. Nectar guides are absent in wind pollinated flowers and nectar is absent, while in insect pollinated flowers, nectar guides are present and nectar is present to attract insects. Colorful petals attract insects to themselves. True or false? True. On this slide, we have the differences between the pollen of insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers. Pollen grains are small in wind pollinated flowers, while pollen grains are larger in insect pollinated flowers. Pollen grains are dry and dusty in wind pollinated flowers, while pollen grains are sticky in insect pollinated flowers. Pollen grains are smooth coated in wind pollinated flowers, and Pollen grains are rough coated in insect pollinated flowers. Pollen grains are light in wind pollinated flowers. Our pollen grains are relatively heavy in insect pollinated flowers. Pollen grains are easily carried by wind. The pollen grains of wind pollinated flowers are easily carried by wind, while the pollen grains of insect pollinated flowers are more easily carried by insects. Pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from an anther to a stigma. There are two types of pollination, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, pollen is transferred from anther to stigma of the same plant, from the anther to the stigma of the same plant. And this picture here is showing us self-pollination, and we can see the pollen grains, we see the pistil of the same flower that collects the pollen. So pollen comes loose from the stamen. Remember, the stamen is the male part of the flower, while the pistil is the female part of the flower. Pollination played the same role as fertilization in plants. True or false? False. It doesn't play the same role. Moving on, this slide is showing us cross-pollination. And cross-pollination is transfer of pollen from anther to the stigma of another, from the anther of a plant to the stigma of another plant of the same species. And a good example is shown by this picture of these brightly colored flowers here. And a quick question says, in cross pollination, the plants must be the same species but opposite sex. True or false? Yes, different plants, same species, opposite sex. Correct. Fertilization in flowering plants. Pollination is complete once the pollen released from another anther has landed on the stigma of the same or another flower. The next step in plants' reproductive process is fertilization, which is the fusion of the male and female gametes. The nucleus from the pollen grain travels down a pollen tube to combine with the nucleus of the ovum. Fertilization has occurred when the haploid male and the haploid female gametes have fused to form a diploid zygote. So we have a picture here showing us fertilization. The pollen grain travels down the pollen tube into the ovary to get to the ovule or the egg of the female, the sperm nucleus, and then the egg. The sperm nucleus fertilizes the egg. The development of the fruit. Once fertilization has occurred, the ovule is then called a seed. The ovary wall then becomes the pericarp, and the protective pericarp with the seed inside is called the fruit. A seed structure. This picture here is showing us a seed structure. I have the epicotyle, the radicle, micropyle, scotylodon, and testa. These are parts of a seed. And then conditions for seed germination. Seeds need the following to germinate. Seed need Seeds needs supply of water, it needs oxygen for aerobic respiration, and it needs temperature suitable for the enzymes involved in germination. Warmth is a necessary condition for the germination of bean seed. True or false? False. Warmth is not a requirement for seed germination, but temperature is. This slide says the diagram shows a cross section of an insect pollinated flower. Which label is the stigma? That should be A. Correct. Which sequence of structures does a pollen tube grow through a flower? starting from the stigma to the style, down to the ovary and then the ovule. Correct. This slide says which row shows the conditions required for germination. Oxygen is a requirement, suitable temperature, and water. D. Correct. The picture shows two wind pollinated flowers. Which row shows the features of these flowers? Um, Large petals, no. It's a wind pollinated flower, so there can't be large petals. Feathery stigmas, yes. And anthers positioned outside, likely. But feathery stigmas are most likely to be present. So this brings us to the end of sexual reproduction in plants. Check us out on www.edubbey.com for more of our classes. Thank you.